Hello, everybody. My name is Ray. Welcome to the Evangelical Dark Web. Today, we're going to be talking about Steve Dace going woke and his recent pattern of struggle sessioning his audience. And I'm a little, invested in this story personally because I really like Steve Dace. I've been listening to his show for quite a few years, longer than I've been doing Evangelical Dark Web, actually. So for this to be the trajectory is just pretty sad to me, actually. And there's like a three front war with the audience that Steve Dace is having, and I don't like it. And as a person with an audience, I don't want to uh, ever be in a place where I'm at war with my own audience. I think that's a very bad place to be. And we're going to talk about Steve Dace struggle sessioning his audience. But first, I do want to let you know I do have a book, Winning Not Winsome, which is actually largely inspired by some work by Steve Dace. So, I just have more of a spiritual application than a lot of a political application, but this book is pretty influenced by Steve Dace to a prominent degree. But nevertheless, we also have a Patreon-like system at evangelicaldarkweb.org/join, linked in the description below. And the least you can do is like this video, subscribe to the channel, to the podcast if you are new. Best way to help out with the YouTube channel is new subscriptions, by the way. So, like I said, Winning Not Winsome, new book. It's available on Amazon, linked in the description. And do buy it. It's my first ever book that I've published. So, here we go. A little bit of a background, because I referenced a few other issues that they're warring with their audience over. And one of those issues is the fact that the men aren't doing enough. The men aren't doing enough. A lot of complaining about the men in their audience. A lot of this comes from the co-host Todd, who is a Catholic, who's been very vehemently going after Protestants on Twitter lately. Because again, you cater to an evangelical audience and then you're mad, or you're increasingly mad, because this has always been the case that, a lot of people didn't like Todd because he was Catholic, and, that's been the case for years, right? But this year, especially in the last few months, he's been especially going after, the Protestants in the audience, and, prominent Protestants on Twitter. And, it's definitely been a point of contention, but I just find that ironic because, they talk about a big game about masculinity, but Todd does believe in co-redemptrix. He has said that on the show. Like, I was hoping that he'd be a Catholic that was, pre-Vatican II, doesn't believe in co-redemptrix, maybe doesn't believe in immaculate conception. I had those kind of hopes, but that is definitely not the case. But Steve goes to a church that has female pastors, and I think that's a bigger deal than is made out to be. If you want to talk a big game about feminizing, being feminized and effeminate and trying to, man up and, take dominion, and you submit to female pastors or go to a church that has female pastors installed, like, you aren't really living up to the reputation that you give yourself. It's kind of been a known quantity that Steve Dace goes to a multi-campus megachurch. I was just under the impression that because he has changed churches. He used to go to an evangelical free church, but I don't know when that changed. I don't believe he's been going to, this is called Eternity Church. He hasn't, I don't believe he specifically said that this was the church, but I do have a source that told me this was the church that he goes to. That's pretty, reliable on this type of subject. And also, this church has a massive building project that Steve Dace has explicitly talked about. So as far as like the points that Steve Dace has acknowledged on his show, that, he goes to a multi-campus megachurch, which he always has as long as I've been listening to him. I just didn't know it changed. And then he's given substantially to a building project of his church, and this is the church that he goes to. It's called Eternity Church, and I've never seen this on a church website before. Eternity Church agrees and believes in the National Association of Evangelicals statement of faith. Now, the NAE is an extremely woke organization. They are one of the most corrupt organizations in evangelicalism, and it's not even close. They are up there with the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission. Megan Basham does talk a lot about them in the book that she wrote, Shepherds for Sale. So that I've never seen a church pander to that liberal organization in their faith statement. And their faith statement, while it takes a bold stance on marriage, homosexuality, and gender and stuff like that, they also believe in women in leadership. They believe in female pastors, which is liberal. That is theologically liberal. It might not be as theologically liberal as gay affirming churches, but it is theologically liberal. You have historically deviated into a theologically liberal territory. Just like if you were to deny inerrancy, you've already denied the authority of Scripture, because the Bible's very clear on this issue. So I think that part of their reputation is a facade, the masculinity angle. I think it's largely a facade. And this is the building project, by the way. And to me, little commentary on some mega churches here. If you're going to have a massive building project, make the building beautiful. Build a cathedral. Come on, people. But anyway, I digress. It's a necessary digression. So Steve Dace has also been at war with his audience over his decision to vote for Donald Trump. Now, I have no qualms about him deciding to vote for Trump. I really don't care if someone wants to vote for Trump or not to vote for Trump. I believe that both are within the Christian conscience and, Christian liberty for this strategic or tactical decision. That it falls within the bounds of Christian liberty. I believe that voting for Kamala Harris is a sin, though. Just to be clear. But you can vote for Trump, not vote for Trump. I believe either of those are valid options for a Christian. But if Steve Dace had just said that, and just moved on, that he was going to vote for Trump and then just moved on, but instead he's insisted on arguing with his audience, because I guess a lot of people have made points that have gotten under his skin, and you shouldn't engage that. Make your point, move on, be an adult. But that has not been the case. And then the other thing is that, to me, his show hasn't been very good this year, and largely due to the fact that he wants to maintain Zionism. And I believe after October 7 of last year, he's gone pretty woke on the Jewish stuff. He didn't go woke for black people. In fact, within the last 2 weeks, Steve Dace has been talking about how Republicans pandering to black people is entirely a dumb idea. Well, guess what? The same argument also applies to Republicans pandering to the Jewish voting bloc, because this bloc votes like 77% Democrat. It's very much up there. Like, there's white evangelicals vote, 82% Republican. Jews are very similarly Democrat vote. They're very similarly a Democratic voting bloc. Pandering to them doesn't make electoral sense whatsoever. Their strongholds are New York, Maryland, Florida, and maybe California. I'm not entirely good with, the demographics, but none of these are swing states. None of them are swing states. So why are you talking about this? What does talking about this help? But in any case, the audience has been subjected to struggle sessions, because, he wants to maintain that, as a Christian, he's a Zionist. And to me, I believe that Matthew 28 doesn't really give you Zionism as an option, because, we want to see, because we don't actually hate Jews. I think people like John Hagee actually hate Jews, because they don't actually want to see them come to know Jesus Christ. I do. I guess the problem is, what sort of messaging actually works better to that end? Is pandering, which is what does pandering work? Or, do other methods work? Should we maybe try something else? But in any case, I also don't think that pandering is good doctrine. So this is a clip from Steve Dace's recent show. It was his Monday show. And it's a struggle session. It's about 6 minutes long. I'll interject as we go along, but here goes.
This isn't a nuanced take. This isn't some, again, Christianity. When you have a biblical worldview, truth becomes obvious. And you realize that God wants truth to be obvious. He can't do much more to be known than give us a book for free with his thoughts and then put himself in our own human form to live with us, Emmanuel, God with us. God wants to be known. It is the Gnostic, pagan, heterodoxical ideologies that claim they have woven some code, Bible, or some unknown fabric of history that's been lost. And prove us wrong. Prove us wrong that Jesus, as a child, didn't heal a bird and then after he killed it and brought it back to life. Prove us wrong, the Gnostics said to the church fathers. You know what the church's fathers said? Get out. Get thee behind me, Satan. That's what they said. Get out. Not happening. And that's always what the Farrakhan and Nazi and communists, that's always what these types say.
So it's interesting that he brings up the early church fathers who, some of them said some pretty saucy lines about this type of group that he's, struggle sessioning for. John Chrysostom comes to mind, and Justin Martyr also comes to mind. So just to name two examples, we also have Constantine and the Edict of Milan, which dispensationalists hate Constantine, by the way. But Constantine, in my opinion, was rightly sainted by the church. That's just my opinion. That's my hot take. But I learned the Anabaptist version of history first, and then I kind of unlearned that because it was less than honest. But in any case, I don't think Steve Dace is overly familiar with the patristics and their view of Jews as a distinct religious group.
They have some counter narrative to the most obvious of truths. Prove us wrong. I don't know. Candace Owens, the total crook and grifter, and has no credibility. Prove me wrong. How would she prove me wrong? I read it somewhere. I heard it somewhere. In fact, I read that in a lot of places, actually. How do I know it's not? Todd, that's not true. Prove it wrong. Aaron, prove it wrong. How do we know? Here's what we know. If a Zionist cabal has been running the world all this time, they suck at it. They didn't have a country for over 1,800 years. The country they're in now has been more cited by the UN than any other nation on earth, and it's not even close. This is the worst global closeted cabal of all time. It's the worst cabal ever. And it was powerless 6 million of its own people from being slaughtered in the worst Holocaust in human history. That we know. Here's another thing we know. The timing of this. And that's how you know it's coming. Listen, I think you can absolutely question dispensationalism and whether we should use people's eschatology, that's a relatively new theory, to be the driving impulse of American foreign policy. We've done some of those shows, yes, right? I think that's totally fair game. That's not what we're talking about here. I didn't agree with AIPAC thinking it got to try to take out Thomas Massie in a primary. Didn't agree with that. Okay? Don't agree with that. But here's how you know this stuff comes from a dark place. Look at the timing of it. She and her ilk have begun promoting this after October 7th.
Now, this is just factually untrue. I mean, the internet has been, it's kind of been a meme about noticing for, multiple years now. Like, it's called noticing on the internet. And a lot of, people that Steve Dace would look up to also noticed. So here's something else that Steve Dace kind of doesn't understand is, it's a lot more nuanced. Like this is, Winston Churchill, for instance, also believed many of the same observations that, Candace Owens might make. Now, I'm not trying to defend Candace Owens. I don't know what she said. I really don't care because I don't like Candace Owens. I have never really liked Candace Owens. So I don't really care. I've always kind of viewed her as a grifter, but mostly for, the black female just stealing white male talking points thing. And she was, rose out of tokenism, and she used the victimization of Gamergate to build an audience into conservatism. And I'm not a fan of that. But, her current path, sure. But is Candace Owens the best representation of the ideology that Steve Dace is trying to speak out against? And the answer is no. You're clearly cherry picking the easy target, which is Candace Owens, because I don't think she's super intelligent, just my opinion. And I think she's, she has a credibility issue. She's not choosing something, she's not, choosing more intellectually rigorous, or he's not choosing someone more intellectually rigorous to go up against. I'll at least give Doug Wilson that. That Doug Wilson, arguing against Andrew Isker, he was at least trying to engage, someone who, largely questions the narratives, that is actually grounded in, better theology and stuff like that. Instead, he's focusing on the weakest people that hold to a position. I don't really think that's a valid, critique. I mean, I could go after John Hagee to make these points, and I have gone after John Hagee in the past. But it's not only John Hagee that I go after for this type of woke theology, and it really is woke. Because anti-Semitism has always been a liberal buzzword. The ADL has always been an evil organization. So it's just history.
This is your response to the rise of Islam? This is your response to what's happening on the streets of London? This is your response to what's probably going to happen on the streets of Chicago this week? This is your response to what went on all the university campuses all spring long? This is your response to all the women that got raped and murdered by Islamists on October 7th? It is not to question how much more lenient the West should be of what has been a clear and obvious, historically documented invading force against the West for 1,500 years. No! It's to look at the people that were the victims of that invading force and say, blame the Jews. You're not smart. Don't let this stuff in.
So this is where Steve Dace does not understand history, and specifically European history. For the most part, the Jews often welcomed Muslim invasion. They played a more allied role in Islam's invasion of Christian-held territories. Spain would be the most iconic example. So that's just worth noting. Again, a lot of ignorance on history. For the most part, Jews and Muslims will team up to fight Christians. That's just more often the case. There are some... I can think of one example of the reverse, and that's the Spanish Civil War, where Muslims did fight with Franco. But other than that, it is far more normative for Jews and Muslims to fight Christians that, to join forces to fight Christians than the reverse. Just an observation to note. And that's also why I don't believe that Islam and Christianity are just going to be natural allies against this. Like, the people peddling that, there are, I don't want to say respectable voices, but there are a lot of people in conservatism that believe that. I do not agree with that whatsoever. I think that's a suicidal gambit. It has not worked out in Europe. But again, who has opened the borders of Europe, of the United States? Who supported that? What is the NGO that's most funding the, one of the most prominent NGOs with the invasion at our southern border? It's the Hebrew Immigration Aid Society, which Ben Shapiro, someone who's supposedly on the right, has donated substantially to. So People like Ben Shapiro have supported the invasion at our southern border with their dollar.
You didn't come up with a new angle. You're demonically deceived. The Lord rebuke you. Cast it out. This doesn't come from a good place. The Jewish nation is the most isolated it's been in its history since 1948.
Again, that's just not really factually accurate. It's a very subjective thing to say in the first place, but, you know, I don't see how it's factually accurate to say that.
And now's the time we want to talk. A bunch of wealthy Jewish donors couldn't even get the universities who have endowments bearing their name to crack down on Hamas caucus protesters. But now's the time where we clearly need to see that there's a great globalist Zionist conspiracy running the world. Are you kidding me with this? You're not smart. You're dumb, or you're deceived, or you're the deceiver. Do not let that in. I'm not letting that in. And I don't care who it offends. I don't care who threatens me. I'm not letting that in. I'm not letting Blair White in. I'm not letting homosexual surrogacy in. And we're not letting anti-Semitism in. We've already got a party for that. They're having a convention this week. Let them own that topic.
So let's talk about some history for a second here. Obviously, Steve Dace is Protestant. He's, oftentimes shown a lot of respect and reverence for Martin Luther. Now, Martin Luther wrote a very famous book about this subject, so I guess Martin Luther was, demonically deceived, according to Steve Dace. Winston Churchill was also a noticer. Let me just pull up a quote from Winston Churchill that I have here. Winston Churchill once wrote, "Although in all these countries there are many non-Jews every whit as bad as the worst of the Jewish revolutionaries, the part played by the latter in proportion to their numbers in the population is astonishing." And that is Winston Churchill arguing in favor of Zionism. And Winston Churchill, in arguing in favor of Zionism, drops the term international Jew several times. Which, Henry Ford, also a noticer. You want to know who else was a noticer? Billy Graham. I'm sure Steve Dace likes Billy Graham quite a bit. And in a recorded conversation with Richard Nixon, they talk about anti-Semitism, but they talk about how the Jews are causing the anti-Semitism with their behavior. And Billy Graham brings up the connection of Jews in the porn industry. Billy Graham brings this up. Billy Graham was a noticer. Richard Nixon was a noticer. Winston Churchill was a noticer. Martin Luther was a noticer. The list could go on. And yet, Conservative Inc. wants to struggle session their audience. Now, this is not the only time that Steve Dace has engaged in this level of struggle sessioning. This is just the most recent example. So I, am using this example, but I'm speaking to the broader context of what Steve Dace has been saying as of late. But a lot of pretty smart people in history have noticed things. And to me, the answer is spiritual. If people don't have Jesus, it's not unsurprising that they're going to do stuff like this. However, let's up the ante a little bit. If people have an identity staked in not believing Jesus, a lot of bad things will happen. A lot of bad things will result. This is a concern. This is a concern of people like Billy Graham, who also dropped the famous, in the Richard Nixon recordings, he dropped the famous Revelation tagline. But anyway, moving on.
You're not smart. You're dumb. You're demonically level deceived, or you are the deceiver. There's nothing new. There's nothing nuanced about this. It comes from a very dark place, and you can tell it does given the timing by which it is emerging. The leader of Israel can't even get half the Democrat members of Congress to sit in a chair and hear a speech, but yet he's the front for a Zionist club running the planet?
Again, this is a major straw man that, I don't really know the conspiracy theorists that believe Benjamin Netanyahu is the front man for it. I mean, he's just a politician, but the idea that the Democrats didn't want to listen to his speech, I don't think is significant evidence to either point. He doesn't bring up the prominent, figures in the Democrat Party, especially in the Joe Biden administration that so happen to be Jewish. Glenn Beck earlier on Twitter today went after a figure in Georgia who's run for office several times. So I believe that him and Glenn knew each other or have spoken to each other. And he went after him for pointing this out as an example of hatred. And it's like, where is the hatred in pointing this out? You want to stop anti-Semitism, you got to actually address why people are anti-Semitic. And Steve Dace is refusing to do that. Instead, he's just calling it demonic and equating it to a love of Hamas, which is a straw man.
Get out of here. You're too stupid to be taken seriously. Or worse. You're really good at this. Nothing good happens after a culture mainstreams anti-Semitism. Nothing good happens. Nothing. Google that, Candace. Google that for you. Research that. Cultures who thrived and succeeded after mainstreaming anti-Semitism, and I'll wait.
So let's give 3 quick examples that debunk Steve Dace's narrative at the end there. Spanish Reconquista. 1492, Spain expelled all the Jews. They entered their golden age. It's just a historical fact. And it was a literal golden age. Now, their golden age wasn't as great as it could have been, but it was as great as Spain has ever had it. I'm going to go with Rome also. After the siege of Masada, so 80-70 after they crushed that, and again in 81-20, they do enter their greatest extent, I believe, shortly after that. And I believe during Constantine's era, they had a resurgence of, prestige and power. So, again, Constantine respecter here. He was one of the better Roman emperors, especially since he was one of the few Roman emperors that reversed the decline of the Roman Empire. So, there's 2 examples. I'm going to say the First Crusade. There's the People's Crusade, and then there was the Prince's Crusade. Both were not very friendly to Jews. Both succeeded, and both thrived, and we had the creation of the Crusader states. So there's 3 examples for you, Steve. I'm going to stick to the rule of 3. There you go. You asked? You wanted me to Google it? I didn't need Google. I had it in my head, but because I do nothing but study history on my spare time, there you go. But in any case, this is a struggle session. It's the same logic that was applied with critical race theory. You just swap out black for Jew, and now you're just using the same victim narrative. I'm not here for that. I'm just not here for that. I'm a Christian. I want all people to know Jesus. And that means all people. I don't create a distinct category of unbeliever that, treats Muslims worse than others. Or, gives a favorable classification for, the Jewish religion that it would not give to the Muslim or Hindu religion. I don't believe that's right. I don't believe there's a biblical justification for that. That's not hatred. As a Christian, I also realize that if people don't have Christ and people who do not have Christ are in positions of power, bad things happen. Often. These are just facts. These are just patterns. And it's all... And calling that out is demonic according to Steve Dace. It's getting hard to listen to. I might not listen to him much longer. I'll probably, discontinue my Blaze subscription. even though I don't listen to him on the Blaze. So there's not really a reason to continue having a Blaze subscription these days. But in any case, that's all I got to say about that for now. My name's Rez, the Evangelical Dark Web. If you like this kind of content, subscribe. Until then, stay based, Christ is King, and we will catch you on the next one.